Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's broadcast is titled HINDUTVA in America. Don't say you didn't know. We are privileged to have two well-qualified guests to speak with us on this subject. And the first up is a brother from India. His name is Ajit Sahi. SubhanAllah, I should note that in the lead up to today's broadcast, this was one of those days when what could go wrong went wrong. And I lost the introductory information on the two brothers. I just can't find it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them say a little bit about themselves, and inshallah ta'ala, when we share this video after the broadcast, we will make sure to include that bit of information on both of them. But for now, we want to begin the broadcast with a bit of video of Ajit Sahi engaged in the very important informational work of pushback on this growing menace known as Hindutva. We're going to show a piece of video and then invite the brother to the platform for some substantive dialogue. Let's see the video, Brother Sadiq.
One of the downsides of going near the last of a program is that anything you wanted to say has already been said by almost everybody. One of the upsides of representing a civil rights organization is that you can truly speak your mind. And I think that's what I'm going to do for the next 3 minutes. Let's just look at what is at stake here. We have already done a complete 360-degree encapsulation of what's going on in India. But what is at stake? India's UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, is next month. And what is at stake here? Well, India is the world's largest democracy. And we call it the world's largest democracy because it has the world's second largest population after China. And China, as we all very well know, is not a democracy. But let me just break the news to you. In another couple of years, it's quite possible that India will cease to be the world's largest democracy, and that mantle is going to fall on the United States of America on the strength of its population. Or what's happening here is that India is about to lose its democracy. And I'm saying this with complete recognition of what this means. The next elections, general elections in India, are due in May of 2024, which is less than 2 years from now, which is about 20 months from now. And we have already seen the BJP, India's ruling party, win 2 back-to-back elections. Their vote share is pretty strong. So now what's happening is that the Western countries, who are really the most powerful in terms of running the process at the United Nations Human Rights Council, they are beginning to increasingly ignore what's going on in India because for a whole variety of reasons, from defense ties to business ties and all of that stuff. It's quite likely that the West, including in North America and Western Europe, will continue to ignore because they are eyeing the big markets, the big resources coming out of India. And that's going to be disastrous, absolutely disastrous, not just for India. It's going to be disastrous for the rest of the world and especially for the Western countries. I say this because back in the day, 75 years ago, when India gained independence from British colonial rule, it proved to be a bellwether. India's freedom from British colonial rule excited millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world. And in the next 20 years, we saw a rash of, we saw a run for democracy in most parts of the world. You look at Africa, you look at Latin America, you look at Southeast Asia, everywhere. And now that we are literally facing a collapse of democracy in India, I fear that there will be a run for a collapse of democracy in the rest of the world. I will conclude by reminding you that the DIDN Institute of Sweden has already said that India is an electoral autocracy. The Freedom House, which is one of the very respected research organizations in the United States, has for the last 2 years downgraded India's democracy from being free to partly free. It is about minority rights, but it is about a lot more than just minority rights. You are looking at a complete authoritarian country that is being shaped into existence under the leadership of Narendra Modi, India's current prime minister. It is absolutely of great significance to all the Western countries. If you do not stop India right now, India will destroy peace and democracy in the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
That is a very powerful and sobering opening for the discussion today. We want to bring our good friend Ajit Sahi on now. And first of all, welcome to the day's broadcast, Brother Sahi. It's good to have you with us. And I think a good starting point would be for you to say whatever else needs to be said about who you are, beyond being the advocacy director for the Indian American Muslim Council. And I should note also that unless something has changed since you and I were last in each other's company, you are not Muslim, you're Hindu.
Yes, correct.
Yes, you're Hindu. And so from the standpoint of being both Indian and Hindu, you are raising the alarm about Hindutva, not just over there, but also here in the West. Say whatever you would like to say about, about who you are beyond being the advocacy director for this organization, and your thoughts, your opening thoughts on this topic that we're having today, Hindutva in America. Don't say you didn't know.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to this program of yours. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. My name is Ajit Sahi, and as you noted, I work as advocacy director with the Indian American Muslim Council. The Indian American Muslim Council is a nonprofit, a registered 501c3. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C. This organization was founded in the year 2002, 22 years ago, and it was founded a few months after more than 1,000 Muslims were killed officially. Actually, the unofficial figure is close to 3,000. But more than 1,000 Muslims were officially killed by Hindu nationalists in an orgy of violence in the state of Gujarat, which is a West Indian state. It's in Western India. And at that point in time, the head of the Gujarat state, the administrative head of the Gujarat state, was Narendra Modi, who is now India's prime minister. And for years, he has been accused of actively abetting and allowing that violence against Muslims to occur. In fact, his voters, he shot to national fame and international fame because he allowed the Muslims to be killed. There is enough evidence, as documented by many organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, many others. In fact, Mr. Modi was banned from coming to the United States for 9 years, from 2005 to 2014, until he became prime minister, because of his complicity in that anti-Muslim violence in 2002. So the Indian American Muslim Council was formed right after that, because Muslims of Indian origin living in the United States were stunned to find that many among the Hindu Indians, Indian Hindu Americans, who had been friends for a long time with the Muslim Americans, these Muslim Americans were stunned to find that many of these Hindu Americans were actually siding with Modi, and not with justice, not with truth, but with Hindu nationalism and partisan behavior. So that is when this organization started. I am formally a journalist from India. I now live in the Washington, D.C. area. As advocacy director, I work with the civil society, the wider civil society, in bringing attention to violations of civil and political liberties in India, as well as the expansion of the Hindu nationalist ideology inside the United States. And I serve to bring this awareness to both the governmental sector and the non-governmental sector. In the governmental sector, to the elected officials, lawmakers at every level of government, from the city to county to state to the federal legislature, that is US Congress. And we work also very closely in bringing awareness to federal agencies such as the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, so on and so forth. So that is the introduction. Insofar as today's topic is concerned, Hindutva in the United States, I think one of the fallouts of October 7th in Gaza, Israel, has been that the Hindu nationalists in the United States have come out in open support of Zionism, complete and open support. So while on one hand, the Hindu nationalists had been attempting to align themselves with the progressive elements of the American society, especially organizations such as the Black Lives Matter, the National Alliance for the Advancement of the Colored People, NAACP, and many others. And yet, following October 7th, they have come out in open support of Zionist ideology and Zionism in Israel. What that shows us very clearly, that the Hindu nationalists in America are absolutely not aligned with any kind of liberal progressive ideology. Hindu nationalism has now existed as a doctrine, as an official formal doctrine for 99 years. It will complete 100 years next year, when the patron saint, and using the word saint is slightly it doesn't fit here, because the person who fleshed out this ideology, his name was Savarkar, back in 1920. Actually, it's not 99 years, it's been 101 years, because he wrote it in 1923. It's 99 years for the organization called RSS, which is a Hindu fundamentalist organization founded a couple of years after Savarkar wrote a book called Hindutva, Essentials of Hindutva. And that ideology said very clearly that India is the land of the Hindus. Muslims and Christians are non-Hindus. Their gods lie outside of India. Therefore, they cannot expect to have the same rights and privileges as Hindus must have in India. And if Christians and Muslims must live in India, they must accept the primacy, the superiority of the Hindu people, the Hindu gods, the Hindu culture, whatever it might be, the Hindu culture, because there is no one culture in India. And therefore, that is the ideology that says India belongs to the Hindus. Plus, they have created a huge and completely false story of grievances against Islamic invasion, because the invasions were not Islamic. The invasions were invasions by people. That was a different era. People would sit on horseback, put together an army, and they would go killing other people in other parts of the world. That's what so many Hindu kings in India did all the time. The Hindu kings in India did. It's not like people were not fighting each other in India before the Muslims came to India. But that's the story they have created. And right now, that is the biggest grievance that they are nurturing. The Hindu nationalist ideology is premised fundamentally on an utter and a complete hatred of Islam and the Muslims. And that is the ideology that the Hindu nationalists in the United States bring to the United States. They are one of the leading proponents of Islamophobia inside the United States. And that is why it must worry all of us, not just the Muslims in America, but it should worry all Americans that a hate-filled ideology, which is ethno-nationalist, which is the same as the KKK's ideology, as the Christian nationalist ideology, is expanding very fast and at a clip inside the United States, and it needs to be stopped. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, brother. Let's take a little commercial break here, and then we'll bring our other guests into the conversation.
To something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Send food and send kindness to those who have lost their homes and have been plunged into poverty. For those who are a meal away from starvation, a food parcel means an entire family can eat this Ramadan. That's the power of food. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al-Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al-Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al-Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041-583-6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty.
Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Hindutva in America. Don't say you didn't know. Our next guest is another non-Muslim, deeply committed activist, Pieter Friedrich. Before we bring him on, let's see a piece of video involving this activist engaged in his work of pushback on this menacing ideology that's growing in the global community. Let's see that video, bro.
Last year, Sadhvi Ratambra came from India for a speaking tour in the U.S. Her visit was partly organized by groups in America like the HSS, which is the U.S. wing of India's fascist RSS paramilitary, and the VHP America, which is the U.S. wing of the VHP in India, which is itself the religious wing of the RSS and previously was designated by the CIA as a religious militant outfit. So why, in a panel about political prisoners in India, am I opening by discussing Sadhvi Ratambra? You see, she exemplifies the current scenario in that country. Ratambra is the founder of the women's wing of the religious militant VHP in India. Her speeches have been described by one Indian scholar as the single most powerful instrument for whipping up anti-Muslim violence. In 1992, she was one of the main personalities responsible for inciting the mob demolition of the historic Babri Mosque in Uttar Pradesh, India. And the consequent mob demolition of that mosque was followed by anti-Muslim massacres throughout northern India. She faced multiple charges, all of which have been completely dropped under the auspices of the RSS-led government in Delhi. Instead of incarceration, she is now freely traveling around the globe, including to this country, to share her inflammatory rhetoric. Meanwhile, political prisoners of all types languish in Indian jails for the crimes of engaging in activism, academia, journalism, and the like. And I want to briefly give you a high-level overview of who these political prisoners are. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom currently lists 55 people as political prisoners in India, a number which is likely and unfortunately quite inaccurately low. Working within their framework, however, I want to put faces to about 4 of the names on the list. We start with Umar Khalid. He's an academic and activist. He was arrested in September 2020. His father is here with us today. Now, here's the relevance of this lady Sadhvi Ratambra in comparison to Umar Khalid. Well, he was organizing protests against India's Citizenship Amendment Act, a law which was criticized globally, including by the US CIRF. He was accused of inciting communal violence. The violence in question occurred in February 2020 in Delhi, with Muslims as the primary victims. Thus, this young student activist is incarcerated for participating in protests in which members of his own Muslim community were killed by the ruling authorities. Well, Sadhvi Ratambra is free to travel internationally as a spokesperson of the Hindu nationalist movement, which is targeting Umar Khalid's community back in India. He is held under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, also known as UAPA, and I will discuss the nature of this act shortly. Next up is Prabir Perkyasta, a journalist arrested this month under the UAPA. He is the founder of the popular alternative media outlet NewsClick and is among 46 journalists, editors, writers, and others connected with the website who were raided in the past 2 weeks. As a collective of journalists who wrote in his defense put it, it appears that the government is prosecuting journalism as terrorism, while holding him under, quote, vague assertions of some unspecified offense. Moving on now to Dr. Hani Babu. Arrested in July 2020, he is held under, yes, you guessed it, the UAPA. Dr. Babu is a Muslim Dalit Bahujan professor of English at Delhi University, whose only activism was successfully campaigning to implement the legally required affirmative action for caste-oppressed college students throughout India. He is the only Muslim in the Bhima Koregan 16, which is a group of 16 detained activists, academics, and journalists who, in the words of Amnesty International, have been vocal in their criticism of government policies and therefore have often been targets for the authorities. Several of these 16 have been released on bail after serving years in prison without ever being brought to trial, but Dr. Babu remains jailed. Notably, independent investigations have confirmed that purported evidence of terrorism used against some of the BK-16, like Dr. Babu, was planted on their laptops. One person whose laptop was hacked in that manner was the late Father Stan Swami, a Jesuit priest who had devoted his life to social activism among tribals and Dalits in India. He was arrested in October 2020 and held under the UAPA. As Father Swami stated shortly before his arrest, "What is happening to me," he said, "is not something unique happening to me alone. It is a broader process that is taking place all over the country. We are all aware how prominent intellectuals, lawyers, writers, poets, activists, students, leaders, they are all put into jail because they have expressed their dissent or raised questions about the ruling powers of India." He said, "We are part of the process." And Father Stan Swami died in prison in July 2021. Well, I would love to go into more detail about some of these other faces that you're seeing up here. I'll just toss out some of their names. Irfan Mehraj, a Kashmiri journalist, academic Dr. Anand Teltumde, tribal activist Hidme Markham, Kashmiri journalist Fahad Shah, Kashmiri human rights activist Khurram Parvez. Well, as I said, I would love to discuss the details of their particular cases, but in the interest of time, what I do want to leave you with is 3 points. First, these political prisoners, whose pictures 9 out of 55 listed by the USCIRF, you see their pictures up here, they are people from all walks of life. They're journalists, academics, activists. Second, notice the diversity of those imprisoned. They are disproportionately Muslim, yes, but the prisoners include Christians, Dalits, Hindus, and tribals. Lastly, almost all of these people were arrested in just the past 2 to 3 years, and every single one is held, at least in part, under this law, the UAPA. As The Guardian has reported, the use of this law, the UAPA, before Modi's government came to power in 2014 was negligible. But between 2014 and 2020, 10,552 people were arrested under the UAPA. Notably, most of the political prisoners we just discussed, and whose pictures you're seeing up here, were arrested after that 2020 date. And so we don't even have current numbers about how many people have been arrested in the past 2 years. Well, why so many? Why so many arrested like this? Well, as Human Rights Watch states, the government in India is increasingly using this counterterrorism law, the UAPA, to target its critics. The law defines terrorism in a vague and overbroad manner, reverses the presumption of innocence, allows for prolonged detention without trial or charge for up to 180 days, detention for up to 6 months without charges or trial, including up to 30 days in police custody, and it creates a strong presumption against bail. The UAPA allows the Modi regime to conduct politically motivated arrests of its critics without the need to prove any sort of criminal activity. Thus, as Human Rights Watch reports, only 2.2% of the cases registered under the law from 2016 to 2019 ended in a court conviction. This is a law which is used to suppress dissent, to imprison critics without having to bring them to trial or even slap charges against them. In short, in the words of the Human Rights Watch, the UAPA is used to keep critics locked up for years and send a chilling message to others who speak out, making the judicial process itself a tool for persecution and punishment. Well, if India wants to preserve its status as the world's largest democracy, it needs to repeal the UAPA and release these political prisoners. And as the United States of America, being the world's oldest democracy, we must communicate to India that our shared values with that country cannot include, do not include, will never include locking people up for engaging in democratic free speech and peaceful activism. Thank you.
That was an excellent presentation. Let's bring our friend, our activist brother, Pieter Friedrich, and welcome him to the broadcast. Salams, welcome, my brother.
Salams, Brother Mauri, and I'm pleased to be here.
That was a very impressive presentation you gave. I've seen a number of video presentations you have given in different parts of the country. And before the broadcast ends, we're going to discuss a presentation that both you and Ajit were present at in Howard County, right in my own backyard here in the Washington, D.C. capital area. But before that, before we go there with that discussion with the two of you, let me ask you to elaborate on the topic of discussion for today. Why should we in the United States of America be concerned about HINDUTVA in America?
Well, that is a deeply important question, and one that we could spend the next several hours on, but I'll try and put it in a couple of nutshells. As an independent journalist, the focus of my work for the past 5 or 6 years has primarily been on the issue of Hindu nationalism, and especially the connection of the Hindu nationalist movement in India to us here in the United States. And the why is many answers to that, but a couple that I would dwell on. One is because, as I elaborated on in that presentation, which you just showed, the situation in India has grown quite dire. The government there, under the influence of this Hindu nationalist regime, which has taken power for the past decade plus, has become draconian, authoritarian, tyrannical, whatever term you want to apply to it, and pushed the citizenry there who desire a free, open, secular, pluralistic democracy completely up against the ropes. People are being widely arrested on fabricated charges. Dissidents, journalists, academics, activists, people like this Father Stan Swami that I mentioned, who his only crime was devoting the entirety of his life as a Jesuit Catholic priest to working with indigenous people and helping them to become more educated and aware of their rights and so on. These are the sorts of people that are being oppressed, and it's across all really religious lines at this point. Muslims are disproportionately targeted, probably most virulently hated, but Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Dalits, those formerly known as untouchables, secular-minded Hindus, basically anybody that's a dissident. Dissent in India has become basically impossible. And so for the people in India to push back against this regime, this fascist regime, which has taken over with the BJP and Modi, has become extremely difficult. Even organizing political opposition is going, unfortunately, not quite yet there, but almost going the way of the dodo. And here in America, where we have a thriving, massive Indian American community, and we also have many people outside of the Indian diaspora who have long-standing connections to India or love for India, we also have the open and free society, which allows us to do what the people in India cannot currently do, which is to organize, to educate, and agitate against that regime over there, that Modi regime over there in India. Second reason that I would note in particular, and I alluded to this at the outset of my speech, which you played, is that here in America, we have direct corollaries of the leading Hindu nationalist organizations, outfits in India, which are pushing that fascistic agenda over there. We have groups like the HSS, which is the US wing of this RSS paramilitary, which is the fountainhead of Hindu nationalism in India. We have groups like VHP America, which is the US corollary of the VHP back in India, which, as I said, is the religious wing of the RSS back in India. We have many groups like this. And for the past 20 plus years, 20 to 30 years, but especially since the Modi regime took power and in the year or two as it was attempting to take power back in 2014, these American-based Hindu nationalist groups, which are corollaries of those groups like RSS in India, they have served as a pillar of support from America to prop up that regime in India, to offer them material support in terms of sending people back from America back to India to work to get the Hindu nationalist government elected, to work allegedly to even send money there to support them. As I mentioned, they're bringing people over here as to America from India as speakers who are Hindu nationalist demagogues known for inciting violence against Muslims. And they're giving them speaking tours all over America and platforming them, spreading that poisonous ideology here in America. With the situation being what it is over in India, and with the reality being, as unfortunately few people are aware, but that's a lot of my work is trying to spread this awareness, that these American Hindu nationalist groups are such a major pillar of support for that regime back in India. I strongly believe that what we can do to affect change is work from here in America to knock out that pillar of support, which is the American Hindu nationalist organizations propping up that regime over there. And then as far as wrapping up, as far as the why of being concerned, well, certainly the why would include things like these organizations, outfits are bringing Hindu nationalist demagogues over from India to spread Islamophobic, poisonous rhetoric in America, that sort of thing, or that they're using American free soil to help prop up the regime over there. But they are also doing things like getting into our own socio-political arenas, whether it is, we just saw last year in California, as there was anti-caste bill, a bill banning caste discrimination, passed by both houses of the state legislature in California and then vetoed last minute by the governor because of the influence of Hindu nationalists in California. Whether it's issues like we've seen in the past couple of years, New Jersey, for instance, where there are Hindu nationalist sympathizers who are bringing over Dalits, those formerly known as untouchables, and bringing them over and using them as de facto slave labor, basically importing caste discrimination and slave labor into America, or whether it's in, as you mentioned, this event in Maryland, whether it's in politics, state politics, or the federal government, influencing politicians with extensive funding and getting particular politicians in their pocket here in America who will advance the interests of the Hindu nationalist agenda, either to cover for and whitewash the crimes, the atrocities occurring over there in India, or even to work to push HINDUTVA, Hindu nationalist viewpoint here in America, in our social arena, in our school curriculums, for instance. We've seen this happening in various states, in our legislation, and so on. So back to you, brother.
Okay. Let's take another commercial break, and then we'll bring Ajit back on, and we'll have the two guests together with us for the final stretch of this very important conversation.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with many appeal organizations in Gaza.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
In the Eastern Cape, children are facing unimaginable hunger. A baby was rescued, fed only powdered drink. A young girl lost her life searching for food. Children eat grass to survive and return to school on Mondays too hungry to learn, some even crying from hunger. Teachers and principals are giving what little they have, but it's not enough. This Ramadan, you can make a difference. Help us support Muslim families in Gqeberha and rural Eastern Cape. Together, we can feed hope, fight hunger, foster change. Donate to the Al-Fida Foundation. Send your proof of payments to admin@alfida.co.za for Section 18A tax certificates, or contact us on 041 484 1288.
Approximately 2/3 of the population of Yemen are in severe need of humanitarian aid. With Ashraful Aid, you can make a difference. For just 700 rands, you can provide a hamper to a family in need. Visit our website today at www.ashrafulaid.org.
The people of Palestine need your support now. Africa Muslims Agency is on the ground, already providing food, medication, and emergency supplies in Gaza. Donate any amount to Heal Palestine at africamuslimsagency.co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Okay, welcome back. We are engaged in a very important conversation with two very special guests, Ajit Sahi and Pieter Friedrich. The topic of discussion for today is Hindutva in America. Don't say you didn't know. We'd like to have both of our guests on the screen now for the final stretch of this conversation. I'd like to begin. I'd like to come back to you, Ajit. Recently, there was a very thought-provoking and deeply informative community forum that was held at a library in Howard County, Maryland. That's right within the national capital area where both I and you are based. There was some, for me, eye-opening discussion about the growth of Hindutva in this area and the role that a couple of very prominent politicians, one by, I guess you could say by default, by doing nothing, by really not responding to the concerns of this growing ideological menace, and the other by being, it appears, actively involved in helping to push the agenda. At any rate, let's revisit observations that you made at that very important community forum held at that library in Howard County. What would you like to share with the listening and viewing audience on the issues that you raised there?
I think it's important for the Western societies to understand that large sections of the Hindu communities in the West, who are otherwise fairly liberal, progressive, they're good, outstanding model citizens, have unfortunately moved to the extreme right to a position of violent Islamophobia. Narendra Modi has been India's prime minister for 10 years. And the fact that millions of Hindus outside of India back Narendra Modi, support him, should tell us about their own politics. Narendra Modi is a mass murderer. There is no getting around that fact. He is not only a mass murderer, he is also part of an ideology that is an out and out a fascist ideology. He belongs to an organization that is a paramilitary fascist organization. The RSS and its affiliates, it's called the RSS family, the other organizations such as the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the Bajrang Dal, they were actively involved in the demolition of the Babri Masjid. These people attack churches, they attack mosques, they attack Muslims, they lynch Muslims to death. So this is how can the West reconcile with an ideology that does not approve of the rule of law, that is out and out fascist, and that is fundamentally a violent, aggressive, ethno-nationalist ideology that advocates for genocide, right? There are more than 200 million Muslims in India, and there are more than 40 million Christians in India. And this ideology outright advocates for the genocide of these two communities, genocide as described by the UN Convention on Genocide, to marginalize them, to treat them as less than human, less than citizens, and to eventually plan their extermination. And what does it speak of? Your neighborhood engineer, your neighborhood doctor, anybody, your professor. There's a man named Rajiv Malhotra. He is very rich. He lives in the United States. He's written a book calling woke ideology snakes. He calls them snakes on the Ganga, right? There are organizations like Hindu American Foundation. If you read what they do, there are organizations like Hindu Coalition of Hindus of North America or Hindu Pact. What are these organizations doing? Who are their members? The organization called Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America. Who ultimately, it's the same story, that it's the same question that has been raised at the white people. The white people have to answer for their nationalism being, the racism being run in the name of the white race. There is such a thing as white racism. There is such a thing as Christian nationalism. There is such a thing as Hindu nationalism. We know that the people who adhere to white nationalism or white racism or Christian nationalism are not liberal, progressive. They do not believe in human rights. They do not believe in equality. And that is the truth about. So I think this is the core that we need to understand. The Western societies need to understand this. If you look at, you will Google this and you will find it. Somebody like former Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy, he has been felicitated by an organization like the Hindu American Foundation. Why? Why would he go to a program, to a felicitation? Why would he accept that? There is nobody in the Democratic Party in America who would go to a felicitation by Proud Boys, by Oath Keepers. At the rally of Donald Trump yesterday, there were Proud Boys members, and immediately all of the news media, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all of them wrote very critically about it. So why should the Hindu fundamentalists in the United States get a free pass? And that tells us what has to be our main objective. Our main objective has to be to expose, degrade, marginalize, and isolate Hindutva in the United States. It should not matter. It should not matter whether you are a high-ranking doctor or whether you work for, I don't know, a huge IT company. It should not matter whether you are otherwise considered to be very, very liberal. You are a member of Congress. That does not matter. What matters is, where do you stand as a Hindu in America on the issue of Hindu nationalism? It's like what the President Biden is being called out by a huge millions of people in America for standing with Zionism.
Right.
He has many times said, I am a proud Zionist, or I am a Zionist. Something like this he has said many times. And he's being called out. What has happened in Columbia University, the arrests of 113 students, it has now snowballed all over America. You know, people are refusing, the young people of America are refusing to accept Zionism, refusing to accept Israel, including the Jewish students, Jewish young people, right? That is where we have to bring Hindutva. We have to expose it to such an extent that the minute you meet with an Indian American Hindu person who has a politics, and that is, I'm not trying to tar them with the same brush. I'm not trying to say just because I am a Hindu myself, just because you're Hindu does not. But if you say that you are a supporter of Hindutva, then you cannot hide behind the cloak of decolonization. That is absolute rubbish. What these Hindutva people are trying to do is say is that, oh, the rejection of Hindutva is yet another form of colonialism. That is rubbish. That is absolute nonsense. In any case, the forefathers of these modern day Hindutva supporters were people who were in bed with the colonialists. They were in bed with the imperialists, and they continue to be in bed ideologically with the colonialists and the imperialists. So I'm going to stop here.
Okay. Well, I know you had a prior engagement. You needed to get away at 2:50. It is now 2:50. I want to thank you for joining us today, brother. And I am going to be calling on you again. It's a pleasure knowing you, both you and Peter, and other activists who are sincerely committed to raising this issue and being arbiters for peace through justice. I want to thank you for your work, applaud you for it, and wish you a blessed day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Peter, back to you, my friend. We got 10 minutes left in this broadcast, and I knew that the time would go fast. As I noted with our brother Ajit here, there was a forum that was held here in Maryland, in Howard County, a few weeks back. And, there was some information about the threat that Hindutva influences have here in the national capital area, and specifically in the state of Maryland, through both through the governor's office. That for me came as a surprise. I think it would be time well spent if you could elaborate on your concern about the role that the governor's office is playing in helping to spread or protect the spreading of this menace here in the national capital area in metropolitan Washington, D.C.
Yes, that is a fantastic redirect back to the question that you asked me a little bit earlier about basically why should we care here in America? How is it impacting us? Well, in the case of Maryland, Maryland is a prime example. As I discussed at that forum about a month ago in Howard County, I discussed the incident or the case of Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller of Maryland and Governor Wes Moore. Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller is the particular politician who is concerning as far as her ties to Hindutva groups here in America. Now, I alluded to this in our conversation a few minutes back about how these Hindutva groups in America are kind of getting American politicians in their pockets. And Aruna Miller is probably, she took office, I believe, a little bit over a year ago. She's probably the most recent, but also the highest ranking of those politicians anywhere in the US. Backing up a little bit. There was an article, I think it was in NBC News or CNN a couple of days ago, about how this organization in America called the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which is the US wing of India's Hindu nationalist BJP ruling political party, how they are now beginning to mobilize in America to support the re-election of Narendra Modi in India as India's elections are upcoming. And the picture that they chose for the article showed a gathering of these OFBJP people in Maryland, a large gathering. The OFBJP is now a registered foreign agent in the United States. Well, when it comes to Aruna Miller, Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller in particular, it's different with different politicians. One of the main concerns with her is that she has had associations with particular Hindu nationalist organizations, but one of the ones that she's been most closely associated with is this OFBJP, a registered foreign agent in America, which serves as the US wing of India's ruling Hindu nationalist BJP. In particular, she's had things like her longtime campaign treasurer. My friend Ajit was referring to these engineers, these doctors. She's had a longtime campaign treasurer, a doctor from Maryland, who is also a very active member, a leader in this OFBJP organization. As she, over the years, has had people like that in her campaigns. She's been taking money from them. Now she's gotten into office. Well, when we talk about the concerns looking, to the future as far as why should we be worried? With Aruna Miller in particular, she is, as you mentioned, in this DC area. She's in the shadow of the Capitol. She is the lieutenant governor of Governor Wes Moore. Wes Moore has presidential aspirations. He wants to run for president of the US. So she already has a very intimate connection almost into the White House. But even last year, she was in the White House. She was, as the lieutenant governor of Maryland, an invited guest to Biden's White House when Biden hosted a state dinner for Modi. I'm tagging along with her because now that she's been elected, this man now has increased access to the halls of power. Taking along with her as also a guest to the state dinner in the White House was this doctor, supporter of hers, who's been her campaign treasurer, who is also a leader in the OFBJP. So, as wrapping up, that's one of the concerns, is that these people are leveling up into ever higher positions of power, even getting close to the White House. But then also, as I was talking about in Howard County, another concern is the importation of, I talked about these speakers coming from India, but the importation of what I call BJP style tactics to America, where with Aruna Miller, as a journalist, I've worked dozens of sources in Maryland and uncovered, and has been reported on by other journalists, so much with Aruna Miller in particular, where nothing like I've ever seen before. People who are calling her out and questioning her about her ties to HINDUTVA, to these HINDUTVA groups. They're facing intimidation. They're being stalked, allegedly by her husband. They're facing political repercussions, getting knocked out of the party. They're facing loss of jobs. One man in particular has actually left the country as a result of fallout from the backlash against him because he called out Aruna Miller for her HINDUTVA ties. And that's the same sort of thing that we're seeing being deployed in India towards dissidents or critics of Modi, of the BJP. And so yet another reason, why should we as Americans be worried? Well, here in Maryland, in the shadow of the Capitol and the whole DC area, nationally, or with a location with national influence over this country, of course, we're seeing these politicians, HINDUTVA politicians, get in, and as they're getting in, they're deploying tactics which are authoritarian, draconian, and which are fascistic and anti-democratic, to go after their critics who are calling them out for being linked to HINDUTVA.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a minute left.
Yes,
what would you recommend folks do?
I would recommend learn two things, I think, brother. One is what we've just been doing. Get a basic fundamental 101 education, both about Hindu nationalism and about its presence in America. I recommend my book, Saffron America, published last year, which is the 101 about saffron, or about Hindu nationalist influence in America. The other one is do what we've just been doing today. This is how the battle will be won. Today you had a Muslim, a Hindu, and a Christian all coming together, standing in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, against this authoritarian HINDUTVA movement and for freedom of all people. So I think that's number two. We need more of that.
Great. Send me a link for your book, and we will post it prominently. And as with the case of Ajit, I want to thank you, Pieter, for joining us today, and we will have you back again to continue this conversation. It's a very important one, not only important to the United States, but my understanding is there is a growing HINDUTVA influence also in South Africa, no doubts in other parts of the global South.
That is correct.
I'm sure that there are folk in South Africa where this program emanates from, that also appreciate the conversation that was held today. Again, we'll have you back. Thank you. May Allah Ta'ala bless the rest of your day. We're going to close out as we normally do with the verse from the Surah Asr, and then at the conclusion, there's just a 3-minute piece of video that we're going to allow it to be the final statement for today's broadcast, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amalus salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in the translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. We draw this council's attention to the persecution of India's 300 million religious minorities, including Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs, as well as human rights defenders, journalists, and critics. 2 days ago, the police in India's capital, New Delhi, arrested journalist Prabir Purakayastha under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, a counter-terrorism law about which 6 UN Special Rapporteurs had in 2020 written to the Indian government raising concerns over its targeting of human rights defenders, religious minorities, and dissidents. Speaking in India's parliament last month, Ramesh Bidhuri, a member of India's ruling party, called a Muslim parliamentarian a terrorist and a pimp and mocked him for being circumcised. Across India, Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs suffer extrajudicial killings, mob lynchings, arbitrary arrests, torture, prolonged detention, and sexual violence, while the perpetrators go unpunished. Last year, the Indian government freed 11 murderers who had killed 14 members of a Muslim family and raped their women in 2002. Last month, UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Dr. Fernand Vahine, told the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom that the situation in India was massive, systematic, and dangerous. Speaking at a hearing at US Congress, he said India risked becoming one of the world's main generators of instability, atrocities, and violence due to the massive scale and gravity of the violations and abuses targeting Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs. For 4 years, this US Commission has placed India among the world's worst offenders of religious freedom. It has said India's government at the national, state, and local levels has promoted religiously discriminatory policies. Thank you.